The first time I saw the edge of the map, I was 17 and stupid. I was a deckhand on a Zalosian cargo hauler, a job that meant I was the lowest life form on a ship full of beings who were, by most galactic standards, barely above pond scum. We were hauling refined thorium to a research outpost on the fringe of known space. It was a run that only ships desperate for credits or ships that were one bad jump away from being sold for scrap would take. The Zalosians were neither, they were just cheap, and I was human. The Zalosians were a race of insected creatures who communicated through a series of clicks and pheromones. I could understand their language through a crude translator implanted behind my ear, but I could never quite grasp the subtle nuances. They always smelled like damp earth and old metal. They were efficient and transactional. They cared about profit margins, not the meaning of life. The ship, the profit margin, the name should have been my first red flag, was a relic. It groaned with every jump through the slipstream. The lights flickered constantly, casting the corridors in a sickly, pulsating yellow. My quarters were a metal closet that smelled of the previous occupant, a being I never met but who had apparently died of something that left a faint, sweet, rotting smell in the recycled air. I spent most of my time in the observation deck, a small, domed room at the front of the ship with a cracked viewport that was, for all its flaws, my window to the universe. It was there I first saw her. She wasn't a she, not in the human sense. The crew was all Zalosian. Their society had no concept of gender in the way we do. But I had nicknamed her the Navigator because she was the one who always seemed to be poring over the star charts. She was older, her carapace a dull, dusty brown compared to the shiny, black exoskeletons of the younger crew. She moved with a deliberate, weary slowness. Her compound eyes, which usually held the cold, calculating light of a living calculator, held a different look when she studied the charts. I was on the observation deck because there was nothing else to do. My shift was over, and the food dispenser had only produced a nutrient paste that tasted like it was made from regret and old socks. I was looking out at the vast, star-dusted canvas of the Orion Arm. We were passing near the edge of the Sagittarius Carina spiral arm, a region where the density of stars thinned out, and the darkness between them became an abyss. I was watching a nebula, a beautiful smear of purple and green light, when the Navigator entered. She didn't acknowledge me, which was standard. She just clicked her mandibles in a way that sounded like a sigh and began to manipulate the holographic interface built into the floor. It was a magnificent piece of technology, a 3D star map that filled the entire center of the room. I had seen it once before on my first day, and it was the only thing on the ship that didn't look broken. Her many legs moved in a complex pattern and the map bloomed to life. Points of light, thousands of them, coalesced into the familiar shape of our galaxy. Lines of trade routes, glowing white, crisscrossed the spiral arms like the veins of a leaf. The map was an encyclopedia of known space. It was the collective cartographic effort of 1,000 sentient species over 10,000 years. It was a masterpiece. I knew my place. I was a human, barely tolerated, a recent addition to the galactic community. We were the new kids, the ones who had only just discovered the FTL drive, a crude and sputtering thing that was a joke compared to the elegant, silent tech of the elders. We were looked at with a mixture of curiosity and pity, like a child who had just learned to walk and was now trying to run a marathon. Human space was a tiny, insignificant pocket on the map, a few dozen systems clustered around the Sol system. I'd seen it before, a tiny cluster of blue dots. The Navigator was zooming in past the familiar systems, past the trade routes, past the core. She was moving into the outer rim, the wild space, the place where the map began to thin and the official data was replaced with warnings. A flickering yellow triangle appeared, a universal symbol of caution. The information attached to it was in the ancient, blocky script of the Zalosian forerunners. Uncharted. High probability of gravitational anomalies. Proceed at your own risk. This was the end of the line for most ships. This was where the maps stopped being maps and became a list of things to avoid. I watched, fascinated, as she continued to zoom in. Past the yellow triangle, there was nothing but a flat, gray void on the map. Then we passed the last beacon, the last signal of civilization. And then, build tension. A line appeared on the map. It wasn't a natural formation. It was a stark, artificial line, perfectly straight. It started at the top of the map and went all the way to the bottom, like someone had taken a ruler and drawn a line across the galaxy. It was a boundary, a hard stop. On one side of the line, the map was detailed, full of data, the names of stars and the civilizations that orbited them. On the other side, it was just a flat, black, featureless plain. It was like a wall. The navigator's clicking had ceased. All four of her hands hovered over the holographic display, frozen. The ambient hum of the ship's engine seemed to fade away, leaving only the sound of the recycled air hissing through a vent. I knew I should leave. I was a pest, a cargo hauler. This was the navigation station, a sacred place, but my feet were rooted to the floor. I had never seen that line before. It was as if someone had taken a knife and cut the galaxy in half. No, not cut it. They had walled it off, like a quarantine zone. Why had I never heard of this? I grew up on stories of exploration, of the brave star sailors who sailed the black, charting new worlds. The core of human identity, of our very soul, was a collective curiosity that bordered on pathological. The first thing a human does when they find a door is open it. The first thing we do when we see a mountain is climb it. The first thing we do when confronted with a forbidden zone is to wonder what's inside. But here in the galaxy, the most advanced, ancient, and powerful species in the known universe had collectively decided to put a line on the map and call it a day. They didn't just stop exploring. They built a wall and pretended the rest of the galaxy didn't exist. I had to know. A question bubbled up from my gut. It was a stupid question, the kind of question a human deckhand had no right to ask a Xylosian navigator. But my curiosity was a physical force, a pressure in my chest that I couldn't ignore. I stepped forward, my boots making a soft clang on the metal grating. The navigator's antennae twitched, a sign of irritation. I should have stopped. I knew I should have. I remember my heart was thumping, a frantic drum against my ribs. The air in the room felt thick, heavy. I could smell the damp earth scent of the navigator, stronger now. The temperature seemed to drop. I spoke. "What is that?" I asked. My voice was a croak, strange and loud in the oppressive silence. I pointed at the line. "What's beyond the line?" The reaction was immediate and terrifying. The navigator whirled on me, all six of her legs now moving in a blur of chitin and rage. A low, guttural hiss erupted from her, a sound I had never heard a Xylosian make. It was the sound of primal fear mixed with pure, undiluted fury. The translator in my ear couldn't process it. It just buzzed with static. Her compound eyes, normally unreadable, were now blazing with a deep crimson light. I saw myself reflected in them, a tiny, terrified figure. Her click, when it came, was sharp and fractured. "Climax. No human asks that question." She shrieked the words in the galactic common tongue. The sound was like 1,000 pieces of glass shattering at once. It wasn't just a reprimand, it was a condemnation, a curse. The holographic map flickered violently, the line of the border seeming to pulse with a threatening light. Instantly, the door to the observation deck hissed open and two of the larger Xylosian crew members charged in, their own clicking high and frantic. They took one look at me, then at the navigator. The navigator pointed one of her clawed hands at me. She was trembling, her whole body vibrating. Her mandibles clacked in a frantic, staccato rhythm. She turned back to the map and swiped a hand, making it vanish instantly. The room was plunged into darkness for a second before the emergency lights flickered on, casting everything in a harsh, red glow. She seemed to collapse in on herself, the fury draining away, replaced by a weary, soul-deep terror. She looked at me, and for the first time I saw something other than contempt in her eyes. I saw pity. "You are human," she said. Her voice now a whisper, a dry rasp. "You are children. You do not understand the rules, but you must learn them. The map is a record of what is safe. The blank space is not just uncharted, it is forbidden. It does not exist. Do you understand? It does not exist. The two Zelosian guards looked at me. Their mandibles clicked in a low, rhythmic pattern I could only interpret as a threat. One of them reached for a stun baton attached to its leg. Resolution. I nodded, my throat so tight I couldn't speak. I stumbled backward, tripping over my own feet. I scrambled to the door, my heart pounding so loud I was sure it would give me away. I didn't run because I couldn't. My legs were like jelly. I walked, a stiff, terrified shuffle, back to my closet. I didn't close my eyes for the rest of the trip. I didn't ask again. I couldn't. The terror in the navigator's eyes was genuine, absolute. It was the same fear you see in an animal right before it's cornered. It wasn't about protecting a secret. It was about survival. That night in my metal bunk, staring at the peeling paint on the ceiling, I understood. The blank space wasn't uncharted. It was a graveyard. The dead don't need maps. And the line on the map wasn't a wall. It was a warning, a tombstone. Every species in the galaxy knew it was there. And they knew better than to ask why. Because the ones who did ask are all gone. Ending line. I was a human, and our most ancient and sacred flaw was an insatiable need to know. But the galaxy was old, far older than us, and it had learned one brutal truth. Some doors are not meant to be opened. And the ones who built the wall had done so for a very good reason. The reason was us. We were the ones who hadn't learned the lesson yet. And that, I realized with a chill that had nothing to do with the ship's failing life support, was the most terrifying thing of all. 3 years later, I wasn't a deckhand anymore. The profit margin had finally been scrapped, its metal melted down to make something more useful, and I had drifted upward through the galaxy's underbelly. I was a freelance fixer, a glorified janitor for problems that had no other solution. My job was to go to places other people wouldn't, talk to people other people couldn't, and make sure things happened that other people thought were impossible. The pay was good, the life expectancy was not. My current job had brought me to the grand assembly of the Galactic Concordance on the planet of Zelosia Prime. It was the political heart of the known galaxy, a beautiful planet of serene, crystal oceans and enormous, floating islands. The assembly was a massive, spherical structure made of a material that looked like solidified light, a monument to the unity of thousands of species. I was there on behalf of a wealthy Cathari merchant who was trying to get a mining permit in a sector that was technically in dispute. It was tedious, bureaucratic work, the kind of work that makes you feel like your soul is slowly being leached away. My translator was in overdrive, processing the complex legal jargon of a dozen different species. I was the only human in a room of 500 delegates. I was a curiosity, a zoo animal in a business suit. The assembly hall was a marvel of engineering. The delegates sat in a vast, circular formation, their podiums hovering above a central dais. The air hummed with a dozen different languages, a symphony of clicks, whistles, and guttural growls. The atmosphere was always thick, charged with the tension of interspecies negotiation, a cocktail of ambition, distrust, and barely concealed hostility. I was only half listening to the debate. A wive, a species of sentient, gaseous energy beings, was arguing with a brood queen over trade tariffs. It was mind-numbingly dull. My mind drifted, as it often did, to the edge of the map. The line. The navigator's terror. It had become a recurring nightmare, a phantom pain in my mind. The question had festered. I had kept my mouth shut, as she had warned me, but the need to know was a canker that was slowly consuming me. Build tension. The debate was interrupted. A new delegate was being announced. The announcement was delivered in a flat, automated voice that echoed through the hall, a break in the usual pomp and ceremony. It was a simple, monotone statement that froze the entire room. The High Ambassador of the Tzziak Dominion is now present. The Tzziak were an enigma. They were a species of immense power, one of the 7 founding races of the Concordance. They were ancient, powerful, and terrifyingly silent. No one knew what they looked like. They never appeared in person, not in any public forum. Their ambassadors were always and only their machines. The Dominion was a blank space on the map, not because it was a place you couldn't go, but because it was a place you didn't want to go. It was a whisper in the dark, a name that made people go quiet and look at their feet. A heavy, rumbling hum filled the hall. The temperature seemed to drop. A section of the floor slid open and a massive machine rose from the depths. It was a cube about 6 meters tall, made of a black, obsidian-like material that seemed to swallow the light around it. It was utterly featureless except for a single, pulsing red light on its front. It was the pinnacle of frightening technology. There were no windows, no visible weapons, no signs of life. It was just a box. The other delegates didn't speak. The wives' cloud seemed to dim. The brood queen stopped talking. The silence was absolute, broken only by the low, ominous hum of the Tzyak machine. It was the sound of absolute, unquestionable power. This was a Cold War made manifest, a reminder that even here in the heart of galactic civilization, the old powers were watching. I stared at the cube. It was monstrous. There was a weight to it, a gravity that seemed to bend the light and the space around it. The pulsing red light swept across the hall, a sensor array, and when it passed over me, my heart skipped a beat. The light seemed to linger on me for a fraction of a second longer than it did on anyone else. I felt a wave of nausea wash over me, a primal, instinctive fear that made my skin crawl. It knew I was there. It was looking at me. The machine wasn't there to participate in a debate about trade tariffs. It was there to deliver a message. It didn't speak, not in words. It transmitted a data packet directly into the central network of the assembly. A single image. A high-resolution, three-dimensional scan of a star system I didn't recognize. There was a planet in the system, a beautiful blue world, covered in oceans and green continents. It looked like Earth, but it wasn't. There was a massive, barren section on the planet's surface, a continent-sized patch of gray, lifeless stone. And in the center of that gray patch was a crater, a perfect geometric crater. It was a hexagon. The silence in the room deepened. It was a thick, heavy silence, the kind that presses down on you, making it hard to breathe. Then the machine spoke. Its voice was a synthesized, emotionless drone that resonated in my bones. Climax. The unknown zone has been breached. The boundary has been violated. The punishment is extinction. No one moved. No one breathed. The words hung in the air like a death sentence. It wasn't a threat. It was a statement of fact. The cold, emotionless tone was more terrifying than any roar of anger could have been. I saw the brood queen tremble. I saw the wives' cloud flicker, dimming to a faint glow. I saw a delegation of the avian Kestri literally cower in their seats. A murmur rippled through the room, a wave of fear that was palpable. The delegates weren't just afraid of the Tzyak. They were afraid of what the Tzyak represented, the unknown zone, the same blank space I'd seen on the map 3 years ago. The line, the wall, it was real. It was a physical reality, and something had just tried to cross it. My mind was racing, my heart pounding. The boundary had been violated. Who would be stupid enough to do that? And what was the penalty? The machine had said extinction. Not of a ship, not of a species, just extinction. The word was absolute. It had no context. It was a horror beyond comprehension. The cube began to descend back into the floor. The hum faded. The red light went dark. And just before it vanished, it spoke one last time. The words were directed at no one in particular, but they were heard by everyone. The humans are the only ones who don't know the answer. Their ignorance is a danger. It must be corrected. The room erupted into chaos. The hum of conversation, which had been silenced for an eternity of seconds, burst forth as a flood of panicked clicks, whistles, and shouts. But I couldn't hear it. I was frozen. The machine had singled out humans. It had said, the humans are the only ones who don't know. It knew the answer. It was the Tzyak's duty to correct it. Resolution. I was a ghost after that. My legs carried me out of the hall and into a corridor. My hands were shaking. I found a quiet alcove and slumped against the wall. The cool, smooth surface of the crystalline wall was a shock against my clammy skin. I closed my eyes, but I could still see the cube, its pulsing red light, and the weight of its words. My mind went back to the navigator on the profit margin. Her terror, her command, no human asks that question. It wasn't just a cultural taboo. It was a survival instinct. I remembered the look in her compound eyes, the pity. She knew something, something she was too afraid to say out loud. She wasn't protecting a secret. She was trying to save me. The Tzyak were the guardians of the boundary. They were the ones who had built the wall. They had drawn the line, and they were the ones who enforced it with a terrifying absolute finality. The map ended at human space not because of a lack of exploration, but because of a treaty with the Tzyak, a treaty that said, "We don't go there, and neither do you." The question that had plagued me for 3 years wasn't just answered. It was weaponized. It was a threat. The boundaries of the map weren't the walls of a zoo. They were the walls of a sanctuary. Humanity was being kept safe. But the Tzyak had just told the entire galaxy that we were a liability. Our ignorance was a danger. The whole point of the treaty was to keep us in the dark, but we were starting to ask questions. The universe, it seemed, was tired of hiding. Ending line. In that moment, standing in that alien corridor alone, I realized the terrible truth. The map ended at human space not because the universe was telling us to stop. It was telling us we were the ones who weren't allowed to see what lay beyond. We were children in a war zone, and the adults had put up a fence to keep us safe from the monsters. But children grow up, and when they do, they start to wonder what's on the other side of the fence. 4 years after the Zaloja Prime incident, I had become a specialist. I was the guy you called when the problem was too stupid, too dangerous, or too politically sensitive for anyone else. I had a reputation for asking questions that got people killed, and for surviving to ask more of them. The line on the map, the Tzyak machine, the navigator's terror, it all swirled in my mind like a singularity, pulling everything else in. My current client was a consortium of historians, archaeologists, and academics from a dozen different species. They called themselves the Cartographers Guild, and their official goal was to preserve and expand the knowledge of the known universe. In practice, they were a bunch of obsessive data hoarders who would have sold their own grandmothers for a new star chart. They were the kind of people who didn't understand the meaning of the word forbidden. They had hired me to be their security consultant on a salvage operation. The target was a derelict vessel, a ship that had been drifting in the dead space between the Sagittarius and Scutum Centaurus arms for over 5,000 years. It was the Seeker of Truth, a vessel belonging to an extinct species called the Ethel. The Ethel had been a brilliant, curious, and profoundly doomed race. They had been the only species in galactic history known to have attempted to cross the boundary. We were in a small, unregistered ship, the kind that didn't show up on official scans. The Guild had spared no expense on the technology, but they had skimped on the crew. I was the only non-academic on board. It was me, a Voltaran pilot who didn't speak, a crustacean engineer who hummed to itself, and 10 academics who were so obsessed with their work they didn't seem to realize the danger they were in. I called them the professors. They didn't like it. The Seeker of Truth was a behemoth. It was a massive spherical ship, built from a silver alloy that had been polished to a mirror shine. It looked like a dying star, its hull covered in a lattice of what used to be lights. The ship was dead, its power long gone. It was a tomb. We docked with it, a delicate, terrifying process that involved our engineer jury-rigging a connection. The airlock hissed open, and I stepped into the darkness of the dead ship. The air was stale, cold, and tasted of ozone and regret. The only light was from our headlamps, casting long, dancing shadows. The silence was absolute, broken only by the soft crunch of our footsteps on the dusty deck. Build tension. The ship was a nightmare. It was a museum of a civilization's final moments. We found the crew's quarters, their bunks frozen in time, the skeletons of the Ethel still in their bunks, a silent scream on their calcium-deposited faces. The ship wasn't just a tomb, it was a monument to a collective suicide. The Ethel were a humanoid species like us. They had been beautiful from what we could tell from their statues. Tall, slender, with 3 eyes and a peaceful demeanor. They looked like they were made of porcelain. The professors were in their element. They were scanning everything, recording data, whispering excitedly to each other. They were like children in a candy store, except the candy was about to kill them. I was the only one who felt the wrongness. It was a gut feeling, a cold dread that seeped into my bones. The silence was wrong. The ship was too quiet, too still, like a predator holding its breath. We found the bridge. It was a vast, circular room with a panoramic viewport that looked out onto the endless, star-studded void. The ship's main computer was still intact, a massive crystalline structure in the center of the room. The lead professor, a Cathari named Oren, was practically drooling over it. He plugged a portable power source into it. The crystal hummed, flickering with a weak red light. An image flickered to life in the center of the room. It was a recording, the final log of the seeker of truth. The Ethel captain appeared. He was a tall, elegant being with a voice like honey and a calm, serene expression. He was standing on the bridge, addressing his crew. It was a ceremonial farewell, a goodbye to everything they had ever known. We, the Ethel, have always sought truth. It is our calling, our curse. For millennia we have looked to the stars and asked, what is beyond? The answer has always been silence, but silence is not the absence of truth. It is a truth we are not meant to know. The Tzyak have guarded this truth for a reason. They have told us, do not go there. And we have asked, why? We have found the answer. The image flickered. The captain's calm expression faltered, replaced by a flicker of something else. Dread. We have crossed the boundary. We have found what lies beyond. It is a silence that is alive, a predator of the mind, of the soul. It is the end of everything. We are bringing it back with us. It is in our minds, in our thoughts. It is listening. Climax. The screen went black. A static hiss filled the bridge. I stared at the dark screen, my heart pounding. The professors were silent, their faces a mask of horror. The frozen image of the Ethel captain remained in my mind. The words echoed in my head. The silence is alive, a predator of the mind. Then the silence broke. A sound, a soft, wet, slithering sound came from the corridor behind us. It was followed by the sound of something heavy being dragged. The crustacean engineer, who had been happily humming, suddenly stopped. Its carapace went pale. It let out a shriek, a sound of pure, animal terror, and then it was gone. The sound of its body being dragged away was the only evidence it had ever been there. The professors screamed. They panicked, scrambling over each other, dropping their scanners, trying to get back to our ship. I was the only one who stood my ground. I was frozen, my eyes locked on the corridor where the sound had come from. The darkness in the corridor seemed to move, to coalesce into a shape. It was formless, a cloud of black smoke, but it had a weight to it, a presence. It was the silence, the living silence. It had come back with the Ethel, and it had been waiting on this dead ship for 5,000 years. The thing moved out of the corridor and onto the bridge. It wasn't attacking us. It was consuming us. It was a void, a hole in reality. It didn't eat you, it erased you. I watched a professor, a Xylosian, get too close. He didn't scream. He just vanished, his carapace crumbling into dust that was absorbed into the cloud. I couldn't run, my legs wouldn't move. My mind was screaming at me to flee, but my body was locked in place. This was what the Ethel had found. This was the secret at the edge of the map. This was what the Tzyak were protecting us from. The silence. An anti-life. A force of entropy that was the personification of the Big Rip itself. A thought, a clear, crystal-clear thought cut through my panic. It wasn't my own thought. It was like a voice in my head, but it wasn't a voice. It was just a word. Leave. And then something pulled me back. Oren, the Cathari professor, had grabbed my arm. He was strong for his age. He dragged me toward the airlock. I stumbled after him, my mind a blank. The last thing I saw as we scrambled out of the dying ship was the cloud of black smoke reaching out toward the seeker of truth's main computer. The crystal structure was glowing, pulsing with a sickly green light. Resolution. We made it back to our ship. The Voltaren pilot didn't ask any questions. He just saw the terror on our faces, heard the screams, and hit the engines. We detached from the seeker of truth at full burn, the ship groaning under the stress. I didn't look back. I couldn't. I just sat in my seat, shaking, staring at my hands. They were covered in a thin, gray dust, the dust of the professor who had been consumed. The guild had lost most of its members. I had lost my mind. The silence was real. It wasn't a metaphor. It was a tangible, malevolent force. It was a predator that had been waiting for us at the edge of the galaxy. The Ethel had tried to bring it back, but it had killed them and then waited for more. The guild was disbanded. The survivors were too traumatized. The few who were still coherent were now in a secret psychiatric facility on a neutral world. They were all ranting about the same thing. The silence. The silence is alive. The Tzziak were right. The wall wasn't a wall. It was a dam, and the Ethel had poked a hole in it. The silence was leaking through, and now it had tasted us. It had a taste of human fear. Ending line. I had seen the face of the devil, and it didn't have a face at all. It was nothing. The most terrifying thing in the universe was the absence of anything. And we, humanity, were the only ones who didn't know we were standing on the edge of a cliff, staring into the void, about to fall. 5 years after the Seeker of Truth, I had a new job. I was a cultural liaison for the Sol System's newly formed Department of Extraterrestrial Affairs. The title was a joke. The job was a nightmare. I was a glorified diplomat, tasked with managing the fallout of humanity's aggressive curiosity. The problem was, our curiosity was becoming a liability. The galaxy had noticed. We were the only species that seemed to be completely oblivious to the threat. We kept asking questions. We kept poking and prodding at the boundaries. It was a problem that was quickly becoming an existential threat, not just to us but to every species in the concordance. My current assignment was a disaster. We were hosting a cultural exchange on a neutral station, a massive, rotating ring world called the Galactic Garden. It was a paradise, a haven for diplomats, tourists, and merchants from 1,000 worlds. It was also the perfect place for a diplomatic incident. The event was a grand celebration of unity, a carefully orchestrated spectacle designed to show the galaxy how cooperative and friendly humanity was. It was a lie. I was there to make sure the lie held. The garden was a marvel of bioengineering. It had its own atmosphere, weather systems, and a vast artificial ocean. The air was sweet and clean, a mix of scents from 100 different gardens. The architecture was a fusion of styles, a beautiful, chaotic mess of arches, spires, and floating platforms. It was full of tourists, all just trying to enjoy themselves. The mood was festive, the music was light, and the food was exotic. It was all a facade. The tension was palpable. It was in the guarded glances of the alien delegates, the nervous clicks of the Zylosian security, the silent, watchful presence of the Tzziak ambassadors, who, as always, were represented by their creepy machines. The whole place was a powder keg, and I was the one holding the match. Build tension. The main event was a speech by the new human ambassador, a woman named Dr. Aris Thorne. She was a brilliant xenobiologist, a woman of immense intellect and charisma. She was also, unfortunately, naive. She believed in the inherent goodness of the universe. She thought the secrets of the galaxy were just waiting to be unlocked by human ingenuity. She was a beacon of hope, and she was about to light the fuse. She stood on a grand podium overlooking a plaza filled with thousands of beings. The crowd was a sea of alien faces, a kaleidoscope of colors, shapes, and sizes. The air was thick with anticipation. I watched from a balcony above, my heart in my throat. I knew what was coming. I had tried to warn her. I had told her about the Navigator, about the Tzziak, about the Seeker of Truth. She had listened politely, then smiled and told me not to worry. "My friends," Dr. Thorne began, her voice amplified by the station's speakers. "We are gathered here today to celebrate a new era. An era of understanding, of cooperation, of shared destiny. For too long, we have been kept apart by fear and suspicion. It is time to cast aside the shadows of the past and embrace the light of the future." The crowd murmured. It was a polite, diplomatic murmur. They were humoring her. They were waiting. We, the humans, are a curious species. It is our nature to explore, to learn, to push the boundaries of the known. And I am here to tell you, we will not be stopped by fear. We have gazed into the abyss and we have not blinked. She paused, and in that pause I saw a change come over the crowd, a rippling wave of unease. The diplomats from the older species, the Kestri, the Wive, the Zolosians, they all stiffened. They knew what she was implying. A low, hissing sound started to rise from the crowd. It was a sound of collective, primeval fear. "We demand to know what is beyond the boundary," Dr. Thorne declared, her voice rising. "The TZZAC have no right to keep it secret. The map of the galaxy must be complete. The truth will set us all free." Climax. The moment the words left her mouth, the tone of the celebration changed. It wasn't a party anymore. It was a wake. A low, rumbling hum filled the air, followed by the heavy thud of metal on the smooth, crystalline floor. The TZZAC ambassador had arrived. It wasn't a cube this time. It was a sphere, a perfect, smooth sphere of the same obsidian material. It rolled into the center of the plaza and the crowd parted before it. The hum was louder now, a deep, resonant thrum that vibrated in my chest. The ball stopped, and a panel slid open on its side. A figure stepped out. It was the first time I had ever seen a TZZAC. It wasn't what I expected. It was humanoid but vaguely wrong. It was tall and slender with pale gray skin that looked like polished stone. Its face was a blank, smooth mask with two vertical slits for eyes that glowed with a soft, white light. It was wearing a simple black robe. It had no discernible gender, no visible features, just a form that was the ultimate expression of terrifying, absolute authority. It was a judge. The TZZAC walked forward, its bare feet making no sound on the floor. It stopped in front of Dr. Thorne. The silence was absolute. You could hear a pin drop if there were any pins in a galaxy where such things were obsolete. The TZZAC raised its hand and Dr. Thorne froze. Her eyes went wide. She couldn't move. She was paralyzed, trapped in place by an invisible force. The TZZAC's voice wasn't spoken. It was felt. It was a vibration in the air that bypassed the ears and went straight into the mind. "You have asked, you have demanded, you have broken the law." The voice was a chorus of a billion screams, a symphony of the damned. It wasn't a threat. It was a pronouncement, a legal verdict. "Ignorance is not a crime," the voice continued, "but willful defiance is. The map was not drawn to keep you in. It was drawn to keep them out." The TZZAC gestured and a holographic image flickered to life above the crowd. It was a star system, a human colony. The image was of a planet being consumed. The black cloud was there. The silence. It was eating the world, turning it into a gray, featureless void. "This is what you will see if you continue. Your species is young. Your civilization is fragile. Your curiosity is not strength. It is a suicide pact. The TZZAC were given the burden of the barrier. We were given the duty of stopping the silence. We do this not to oppress but to protect. You have broken the peace, but we are merciful. We will not destroy you. We will simply show you." Resolution. The holographic image vanished. The TZZAC lowered its hand. Dr. Thorne was released. She stumbled backward, gasping, a look of pure terror on her face. The crowd was silent. The festive atmosphere was gone, replaced by a cold, hard dread. The party was over. The TZZAC didn't say another word. It just turned and walked back into the sphere. The panel slid shut, the hum faded, and the sphere rolled silently out of the plaza. The Galactic Garden, a monument to unity, had become a monument to fear. I found Dr. Thorne in her quarters. She was sitting in a chair, staring at nothing. She was in shock. She didn't look at me when I entered. She just spoke, her voice a weak, trembling whisper. "It was a gift," she said. "The map, it was a gift, a cage to keep us safe, and we threw it away." I didn't know what to say. I just sat in the chair opposite her. We sat in silence for a long time. The sound of the station's life support was the only thing that broke the silence. It wasn't the silence of the void. It was just the normal, empty, human silence, and it was terrifying. Ending line. The TZZ Act didn't need to destroy us. They just needed to show us the truth. Because once you know the truth, you can't unknow it. You can't go back to the blissful ignorance. You're left standing on the edge of the abyss, staring into the void, knowing it's staring back. And the worst part is, you know it's your fault for looking. The incident at the Galactic Garden had become a galactic news sensation. The footage of Dr. Thorne being confronted by the TZZAC had been broadcast everywhere. Humanity was no longer seen as a naive child. We were seen as a dangerous adolescent, a species that was about to crash the car of galactic civilization. The political fallout was immense. Dr. Thorne was recalled and sent to a quiet diplomatic post on a backwater world. The Department of Extraterrestrial Affairs was dissolved and replaced with a new shadowy agency, the Silence Containment Bureau. I was, inexplicably, offered the role of senior field agent. They were desperate. They needed someone who knew the secret, someone who had seen the silence, someone who had survived. It wasn't a job you wanted. It was a job you got because you were the only one left who could do it. My first official assignment was to investigate a distress call from a human research station on the planet of Proxima Centauri b, our closest neighbor. The station was called the Lighthouse. It was a scientific outpost, a beacon of human achievement. It was also, apparently, in the process of being erased. The journey was long. I was on a military frigate, the Defiant. It was a sleek, powerful ship, bristling with weapons and full of soldiers who were about as excited to be there as I was. The ship was fast, but the journey gave me too much time to think. I kept seeing the face of the TZZAC, the blank mask, the glowing eyes, the voice that wasn't a voice. It haunted my dreams. I saw the Ethel captain, his serene expression crumbling. I heard the sound of the crustacean engineer being dragged away. The knowledge was a poison. The galaxy was a much smaller, darker place than I had ever imagined. Build tension. We arrived at Proxima Centauri. The planet was beautiful, a world of deep blue oceans and vast green forests. It was an Earth analog, a second home. It was supposed to be a paradise. It wasn't. The lighthouse was gone, not destroyed, not abandoned, erased. The entire research station, a complex of domes and towers, was simply gone. It wasn't there. The ground where it had been was a perfectly smooth gray expanse of what looked like glass. It was the same gray as the crater on the planet the TZZAC had shown us. A geological scar, a perfect circle of nothing. I put on my environmental suit. It was heavy, it smelled of plastic and fear, and it made my movement slow. I stepped off the ship onto the planet's surface. The air was fresh, carrying the scent of the ocean, but there was a wrongness to it, a stillness, a deadness. I walked toward the gray circle. The ground cracked under my boots. I was the only one from the ship to approach. The soldiers were too scared. They stayed in the ship. I didn't blame them. I stepped onto the gray area. It was like stepping onto solid glass. There was no texture, no sound, no life. It was the absence of everything. It was the physical manifestation of the silence. I looked at my boots. They were leaving no footprints. The silence didn't just erase things. It erased the evidence that they had ever existed. It was a cosmic eraser. I saw a glint of light in the distance. I walked toward it. It was a small, personal datapad lying on the gray surface. It was in perfect condition, a fragment of the erased station. It was a message. It had been left for someone. For me. I picked it up. It was cold to the touch. A holographic screen flickered to life, displaying a single word. Why? It was a simple question, a human question, the last word of the station commander before the silence had taken them. They had been consumed by their own curiosity. They had asked the forbidden question, and the silence had answered. Climax. I stood there holding the datapad, staring at the vast, gray nothing. The silence wasn't just a force of nature. It was a response, a punishment, a lesson in the dangers of curiosity. The TZZAC were guardians, but they were also executioners. They didn't just keep the silence out. They destroyed those who tried to find it. The line on the map was a suicide pact, a promise of oblivion for anyone who crossed it. A low hum filled the air. I looked up. A new ship had arrived. It was the TZZAC sphere, the same one I had seen at the Galactic Garden. It was hovering silently above the gray circle. It didn't descend. It just hung there, a black, monolithic presence in the blue sky. I felt a wave of despair wash over me. This was it. This was the end. I had seen the forbidden, and now I was going to be erased. I had violated the boundary, and the TZZAC had come to correct the error. I was going to end up like the lighthouse, a gray, featureless stain on a once beautiful world. A panel slid open on the sphere. The same TZZAC figure stepped out. It didn't float or fall. It just appeared in front of me, standing on the gray surface. It was even more terrifying up close. Its skin was like marble. Its eyes were like miniature suns. Its presence was a weight that crushed my spirit. It looked at me. It didn't speak. It just stared. I could feel it probing my mind, reading my thoughts. It was sifting through my memories, looking for something. Then it spoke. The voice was in my head, a chorus of 1,000,000,000 screams. "You are the witness," it said. "You have seen the truth. You carry the knowledge. The silence cannot be undone. The map is a lie, a beautiful lie, but a lie nonetheless. The truth is that the universe is a war between existence and nothingness. The silence is winning." Resolution. The TZZAC didn't kill me. It didn't erase me. It just turned and walked back to its sphere. Before it disappeared, it spoke one last time. "You have seen the truth. You must be the one to tell them. Tell the humans to stop asking. Tell them the map is a gift. Tell them the silence is real. Tell them the answer is no." I was left standing alone on the gray circle. The TZZAC sphere vanished. The Defiant was waiting for me, a tiny speck in the vastness of space. I felt a profound sense of loneliness. I had been given the answer. The map ended at human space because the silence was there, and the silence was winning. The TZZAC had been fighting a losing war for millions of years, and they had finally found a species stupid enough to try to help. Ending line. I was the messenger, the bearer of bad news. I had the answer to the question that had haunted me for a decade, and the answer was not a secret. It was a death sentence. The map of the galaxy was a lie. The boundary wasn't a wall. It was a tombstone, and the name on the tombstone was everything. I didn't go back to Earth. I couldn't. I was too dangerous, too contaminated by the knowledge. The Silence Containment Bureau made me a handler, a trainer. My job was to teach other humans about the silence. I was to explain the rules. I was to instill the fear of God into them. I was an old man now, or I felt like one. My hair had gone gray. My eyes were tired. My memories were a cocktail of horror and regret. I had seen too much. I had learned too much. I was the only one who knew the truth, and I was tired of carrying the weight of it. I was sitting in my office on a military base on Mars. It was a sterile gray room with no windows. The air was recycled. The food was synthetic. My only companions were the files and the hollows of a dozen worlds that had been erased. The base was a mausoleum for a lost civilization. It was my home. I looked at the flickering hologram of the map. It was the same map I had seen on the profit margin all those years ago. The line was still there. The boundary, the wall, the tombstone. I traced its path with my finger, a ghostly line across the galaxy. Build tension. My door chimed. A young woman walked in. She was a new recruit, a bright-eyed, ambitious officer. Her name was Captain Alara Vance. She was young, full of hope, and completely unaware of the truth. Her uniform was crisp, her posture was perfect, and her smile was genuine. She was everything I used to be. I felt a pang of pity for her. "Sir," she said, saluting, "I'm here for the orientation, the briefing on the unknown zone." I sighed. I couldn't even look at her. I just stared at the map. "There is no unknown zone, Captain. There is only the silence, and the silence is hungry." She looked confused. Her smile faded. "Sir, I don't understand. The briefing says the boundary is a strategic military frontier. It says we're protecting the galaxy from a threat. That's what I was told." I turned to look at her. I saw the fear in her eyes, the doubt, the beginning of the end of her innocence. "That's a lie, Captain," I said. "It's a beautiful, necessary lie, but it's a lie. The boundary isn't a frontier, it's a dam, and we are the ones holding the water back. The silence is an idea, a force of anti-existence. It doesn't attack, it erases. It doesn't fight, it consumes. It's the end of everything. And we are the only ones stupid enough to keep poking holes in the dam." Climax. I stood up and walked to the map. I zoomed in on human space. It was a tiny, insignificant cluster of blue dots. It was a speck, an island of life in an ocean of nothing. "Humanity was a mistake," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "We were an accident, a cosmic fluke. We evolved with a need to know, a biological imperative to explore, and in doing so we became the biggest threat to the galaxy. Our curiosity is a weapon, and we're using it to destroy ourselves." I looked at her, my eyes filled with a lifetime of pain and regret. The TZZ Act didn't put the line there to keep us safe. They put it there to keep us from breaking everything. They are our jailers, but they are also our protectors. Without them, the silence would have consumed us all. It's a war, Captain, a war that has been fought for eons, and we are losing. I stared at the map. The line was a scar, a mark of shame. It was the border of a psychiatric ward, a place where the insane were kept away from the things they couldn't handle, and humanity was the most insane of them all. Resolution. I turned off the map. The holographic image vanished, leaving the room in darkness. I could still see the line in my mind's eye. It was as real as the scars on my soul. "The answer is no, Captain," I said. "That's all you need to know. The map ends at human space, and every species in the galaxy knows better than to ask why. Because the answer is extinction, not of a species, not of a world, but of everything. The silence is the ultimate abyss, and there is no coming back from it." The room fell silent. The young woman just stood there, her face pale, her eyes wide. She didn't know what to say. She couldn't. How could she? I had just told her that the universe was a lie, that her entire existence was a cosmic accident, and that the only thing keeping her alive was a force she couldn't comprehend.